So, we've made it. This is it. Last chapter of 1 Samuel. And, yeah, kind of sad, not going to lie. But fortunately, there is a 2 Samuel. And so we will eventually get to that. We are going to take a quick break in between and go to Colossians. And we'll talk more about why. We've talked about it a little bit before, but we'll talk more about that next week whenever we get into it. But then after that, the plan is to, Lord willing, go into 2 Samuel, and that'll be really cool. But today, at long last, we have made it to the final chapter, and it's kind of bittersweet. And it's going to be a really sad chapter, I'm not going to lie to you. This book ends on a real big bummer. It's definitely a cliffhanger ending to where you're kind of like, oh, yikes. I want to know what comes next season. And so, yeah, but real quick, I'm going to give us the context real quick just so that we can kind of fast forward and get into the actual chapter. It's pretty short, and so we'll be able to go through the chapter and then hopefully just kind of reflect on the book as a whole. It will be good to go. But the book of Samuel kind of serves in many ways as an answer key to the book of Judges. Because, after the Exodus from Egypt, the people wandered in the wilderness for a little bit. They got into the promised land, and they were faithful to God's law for about a generation. And then in the book of Judges, we went through this in this Bible study. We just saw the culture slowly but surely falling apart. And I say slowly but surely, but unfortunately it was a lot quicker than that. By the end of the book, everything's just horrible. And we realized that the people need a king, even though that's not really what God had originally intended. He was supposed to be their king, but they're not good at serving that which they cannot see. And so we get to 1 Samuel, and we have been tracking just kind of the development of the culture at that time period. And we start off at the beginning of 1 Samuel during the time period of the Judges. But by the time we end this book, 1 Samuel, and remember, 1 and 2 Samuel were originally one book, right? But by the time we end 1 Samuel, we've kind of seen the failure of the first king. And so really this book is a kind of book about failure, right? We've got a guy who, he's a really faithful guy, Samuel. He is the last judge. He's going to rise through the ranks, and he's pretty great. But they ask for another king, or they ask for a king at least. And then Samuel appoints Saul to be the king, but Saul's also a failure. And in the background of all of this, we have seen God's faithfulness through a young man named David, who is actually going to be the second king of Israel after Saul. Not in this book. He's not going to be king until 2 Samuel. So we've been waiting all this time. He's not going to be king in this book. Actually, I don't even think he's mentioned in this chapter at all. But he's been in the background, right? And we've just been seeing him grow up, and we've seen him rise to the forefront to where really for a lot of chapters he has been at the forefront. We've seen him going through a bunch of stuff, and as a result, King Saul turned against him. He went on the run, and now they are not even around each other, right? David and Saul interacted for the last time. I believe it was maybe, chapter 26, 27, somewhere in there. And they went separate ways. And Saul continued pursuing David, but as a result of his lust for power and his pursuit of David, Saul has unintentionally allowed his kingdom to totally fall apart. And the Philistines, who basically were primarily known historically for just occupying 5 major cities along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, at this point they have advanced so far that they are now in the Galilee region, which, if you can picture Israel in your head, that's up north. And so, as a result of King Saul following David, the kingdom has just kind of shattered. And the Philistines are gaining major ground, and it seems like Saul has finally realized this. And in one last-ditch effort, he's going to fight the Philistines. And today, we're going to see that final battle. And what we've seen is we've been kind of going back and forth between Saul and David the last few chapters. We saw David have some lapse in faith. He went down and actually joined the Philistines for a time, and he was doing some really stupid stuff. He was trying to be faithful to God, kind of, but not in the way that David typically is. He's usually just an amazing dude, but he was failing quite a bit, right? And so we saw that happening. Meanwhile, Saul seemed to be recognizing that his end was coming, and so as this battle was looming and approaching and getting ever nearer, he went and visited a medium, right, a witch, at Endor. He went and visited her, and he talked to her, and he was saying, "What's going to happen to me?" And do you remember what she said? You're going to die.
Samuel said that, right?
Yes, yeah, Samuel, because she conjures up Samuel. Really trippy, weird story. Nothing like it anywhere else in the Bible, except maybe kind of the Transfiguration in a few ways. But yeah, Samuel shows up from the dead, and he says, Saul, you're going to die. By tomorrow, you will be with me in the afterlife. And so Saul recognizes he's going to die, and then we left Saul, and last week we returned once again to David. And David had, through God's providence, he ended up getting turned away from the Philistines. He went back down to his town that he was currently living in. And what we actually got to see was that through some very negative circumstances that resulted from David's sin, God actually was able to draw David back to himself, right? And David, by the end of the last chapter, David has become the David we know and love, to where he is actually, living for the people, living for God. He's serving them, he's taking care of them, and he seems to have kind of repented of his former stupidity, and now he's really just committing to being the faithful David that we love, right? And so we have this contrast, right? David is once again rising through the ranks, and so what do we expect to happen with Saul?
He's falling.
He's falling. Yeah. Because that seems to be how it happens. Every time David rises up, Saul falls. And at this point, where we saw in last chapter, we really see David at the best of the best, right? He has repented, he is focused on God again, and we see at long last, after all these years in the wilderness, it seems like he's finally ready to be king. Which means that Saul needs to be taken out of the picture. But we also know that David's not going to touch Saul, right? And we've known that for chapters now. Ever since earlier on in Samuel, we knew that David says, I'm not going to touch King Saul, I will not kill him. And so really, one really big dramatic element to this whole book is asking, well, how is Saul going to die? How is David going to end up on the throne if he's not the one to kill Saul? If we were to go watch if this were to be a TV show or a movie nowadays, that's the natural climax you would expect the movie to be building up to, right? You have David and Saul, the two kings, and it would have to come to this epic duel, probably with volcanoes erupting in the background or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what you would expect, but David makes it clear that's not going to happen. And so David is off here fighting his own battle, and he wins triumphantly, which means that what do we expect Saul to do in his battle? Lose triumphantly, right? Or lose tragically, I guess you could say. And that's exactly what we're going to see. And so what you see right here is this is a picture of Mount Gilboa, and it's a series of mountains, right? And as you can see, mountains in Israel are mountains. They're really just really big hills. Same thing with Israel. Israel is a pretty small landmass. Once you go there, Ben and I are going in February, that'll be cool. Once you get there, you'll see things are a lot more connected and close than we typically think. We live in Texas, where everything's all spread out, and just to if you're driving from one end of Houston to the other end of Houston, it's like a 2-hour drive. Whereas in Israel, if you drive 2 hours, you've basically crossed the entire country almost. And so everything's really close together there. Whenever they talk about the Sea of Galilee, you imagine a really big sea, but Clear Lake is almost bigger than the Sea of Galilee. So the Sea of Galilee is not huge, and the Sea of Galilee is a little bit bigger than it's bigger than Clear Lake, but not by much. They talk about mountains, and they're really just big hills. And so just whenever you see these terms, just think they're a little bit smaller than you think. But this is Mount Gilboa, and this is the place where Saul and his sons, including Jonathan, are going to meet their fate, and they're going to die. This right here is just a picture of the same place, just from another angle. It's just you can see this is going to that crest right there. This is from the other side, and you can tell that these are at different times of year. At one point it's really green, another point it's very yellow. And those are just places, I'm just trying to give you a visual. Down there, you can see how this is a place that is made for battles, right? This is if you're a person who likes military strategy and stuff, you love this region. This is the land of Megiddo and the traditionally speaking, whenever we talk about the Battle of Armageddon, it's going to take place right over here, right? Because you see how flat it is? I mean, it's like it was made for battles. Napoleon Bonaparte is quoted as having mentioned that this place was it was every warlord's dream. He's everybody wants to fight on there, because it just it's so perfect. You can have, armies camping on different hills and just looking at each other, then they get together and they just fight in the flatlands and they retreat. It just made for battle. And so I mainly put these pictures here so you could visualize it in your head. But what say y'all? Let's hop into the final chapter. Sound good? All right, we're going to take this one paragraph at a time. This is literally the whole chapter right here, 13 verses. A lot shorter than the last chapter we went through. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons. And the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men, on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley, and those beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. And the Philistines came and lived in them. See what I mean when I say this is a pretty depressing chapter? I hate to break it to you, but it's not going to get any more encouraging. Like this isn't. It's just going to keep going downhill. There's going to be like one little hint of encouragement. What do y'all think right off the bat?
Battle. There's just war.
Battle.
Just
The language
violence.
reminds
Prophecy fulfilled.
Prophecy fulfilled. Yeah, Samuel's still a prophet even in his death. What were you going to say?
the language reminds me of like the flood.
Oh, because it's saying this. Like basically it's like no flesh remained. Yeah.
Yeah, like repeats the same thing.
Yeah. And what do you think that the author, like just to go off the idea that it sounds like the flood story in the sense of its emphasis, what do you think that the author is trying to convey emotionally?
It was a big loss.
Big loss? Are you supposed to feel happy about this?
No.
Nope.
No. Which is once again very interesting if you think about it, because pretty much for the majority of this book, who has been the villain? Saul. And so typically, you should feel, you should be rejoicing at this, right? It's like whenever you're watching Avengers Endgame, everybody cheers whenever Tony Stark says, "I am Iron Man." And then Thanos dies, right? Everybody's like, yes, it's about time. But that's not how the author wants us to feel about Saul. Why do you think that is?
He's the Lord's anointed.
Yeah. And how does David feel about Saul?
And he's a person.
And he's a person, yeah. But how does David feel about Saul?
He greatly delights in him.
He loves Saul. And David doesn't want to kill Saul. And who are we supposed to admire? David. And who are we supposed to be like? David. And so if David does not delight in the death of Saul, then the author doesn't want us to delight in the death of Saul. It would be very inappropriate for him to be like, "Man, look how amazing David is," and then for him to rejoice in something that David would not rejoice in. Right? And so the author is emphasizing the fact, yeah, Saul was a terrible person. He did a lot of bad stuff, but his death is still really sad. And in many ways, Saul is just a tragic figure. And I've tried to emphasize this over the course of the weeks. One thing that the Bible does really beautifully is that it makes it clear sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't make it clear, but oftentimes it will make it clear who the villains are, but it never refrains from being honest about the villains, right? It doesn't like over vilify them. It never like makes them like, mustache twirling people who are just totally evil. The Bible's pretty clear about, these are they're mixed bags of people who are just living life and making stupid choices, right? I mean, whether it be Saul, whether it be Judas, whether it be the Pharisees, all of them, they're making bad choices, and you can look at them and you're saying those are wrong, but you're also still supposed to empathize with them. And if anything, I think the biblical message is calling us to identify with them. Because I don't think you're supposed to look at this story and say that you relate more to David than Saul. I think you're supposed to leave this story relating a lot more to Saul than to David. Because I think David is supposed to be such a high standard that you're like, I wish I could respond like David does. And so I think you're supposed to empathize with Saul. Because, yeah, he's the bad guy, but so are we. We are the bad guys of the story. And if we're going to rejoice in Saul's death, then we need to rejoice in our own deaths. But the Bible doesn't really seem to treat death like something to rejoice in at all. You rejoice in the justice. You rejoice in the fact that God is providing for David and God is paving the way for David to be on the throne. But you don't rejoice in the fact that Saul is dead. Right?
Yeah, it's just sad because you know it has to happen, but it should never have had to happen.
Yeah. Well, and you see the casualties of sin. Because who else dies in this story? His sons. Yeah. Yeah. But the one that's most significant to us is Jonathan. Because Jonathan is the one who here's the thing. David and Jonathan are very similar. You want to know what the main difference between them is? We've seen David mess up. We haven't really been enough with Jonathan to see him mess up that much. And even in the time where he did kind of mess up, it wasn't even really his fault. It was his dad's fault. And so Jonathan, as far as we've seen, he is just kind of like one of the perfect guys out there, right? He is also a man after God's own heart. Yet he dies in the same battle. And the attention is really not even on him. It's on his dad. And so really this whole chapter is just supposed to I think it's supposed to be a moment of reflection. And I think it's a very good way where they separated 1st and 2nd Samuel. I think this is a really good moment to separate it. Because you kind of end this, and that's also another reason why I want to take a little break. Because I don't want to just immediately jump into the story of David next week and see about like the happiness afterwards. I want us to linger on this, and I want us to reflect on that for a few weeks, have that in the back of your mind while we're going through Colossians, and then when we go to 2 Samuel, then we can start seeing things get better until they start getting worse again. But okay, y'all ready to walk through it? Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. One verse in, and what do we see?
Everybody died.
Yeah. Yeah. That battle didn't take very long, did it? We've actually seen, 3 chapters building up to this battle? Maybe 4 chapters? Building up to this moment right here. And in the very first verse of this chapter, it's over. Right? There was no fighting chance. And we knew that going in. Right? I mean, that's what Samuel told Saul. He said, y'all are going to lose. And we know that Saul tried to inquire of God. God didn't respond. God is with David. He's not with Saul. Saul had his chance. He squandered it. Here's the result. The Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Side note, real quick. If the people of Israel are losing a battle, what does that suggest theologically?
They're not right with God.
Yeah, they're not right with God, right? This is why it's important for us to study the first 5 books, right? The Torah. Because God makes it very clear. If you're being faithful to me, and if you're living according to my law, you're not going to lose a battle. If you lose a battle, it's a sign that you need to get things right. And so, it's kind of sad. Saul's story started off with him winning a battle. Because the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went and won. But his story ends with him losing a battle. The sad part is that in between, Saul had that moment, remember whenever he looked at David and he said, I have played the fool and I have sinned exceedingly. Right? So Saul had this moment where he recognized that he was a failure, and he had this moment where he recognized that he'd done the wrong thing, yet he didn't repent. He didn't do anything about it. Instead, what he did is just a few chapters later, he runs to a witch and seeks her help instead of God's. Mainly because it seems like at that point it was too late, because he did seek God's help. God didn't answer. And so it's really sad whenever you just look at this, just theologically speaking, it begins in victory and ends with defeat, which just shows you the trajectory of Saul's kingship, right? He started off trying to serve God, but by the end, he's just not doing it, right? To contrast that, do you know how David's going to die? He's going to die of old age. He's going to lose battles every now and then, and he's going to have a lot of hardship in his life, but he's at least going to die of old age. Maverick, hello! Good job. Hey, we're still in verse 1, so.
Nice.
Hey, I'm doing
Yeah.
man.
Well, we're heading into verse 2 now. So the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. All right, help me step into the story. How are you visualizing this? Right, act like you're filming a movie, filming a show. What are you seeing on the screen?
You look on the screen, you see a Philistine guy kill one son, go to the next son, kill the other son, kill the other son.
Yeah. And what are you going to be doing with Saul's character as this happens?
He's dreadfully trying to fight to survive.
I'd probably have him fighting, and then I would probably have it to where he sees every one of his sons fall, right? And I'd probably have it in that order, right? Because who is Jonathan to Saul?
His first son.
His first son, which means it's his
Heir.
heir. All right, Jonathan goes down. Saul sees it happen. Next up, Abinadab. Abinadab's fighting, and Saul looks. And, I mean, first off, he's a father, so he's heartbroken about his sons, but to be fair, there were times where Saul threatened to kill his own sons. But he turns to Abinadab. Abinadab falls too. He turns to Malchishua. He's dead too. At this point, this is where the camera zooms in on Saul, and you see the look on his face, and he's kind of resigned to his fate. Right? He says, yeah, I knew this was coming. That's exactly what Samuel said. You can almost imagine like Samuel's words ringing in his ears, right? Maybe if you were filming a movie, you would have the words ringing there, right? You and your sons will die, and you will be with me. But this is sad. Once again, this is Jonathan. I mean, Jonathan's this amazing guy, and he's just like, his death is just mentioned in passing. Just to get to Saul's death, right? It's not like, there's not this moment where it says in Jonathan, the valiant warrior, the best friend of David died. No, this is, I mean, it's just passing by. But I think that just highlights the sadness of sin, right? I mean, Jonathan was just being faithful. He was just serving his father, and he was fighting in the battle, and he goes down. That's really sad. Okay. But, and just, I like to think of this scene from David's perspective. David doesn't know this is happening, right? David is over here. He's rejoicing with his men and his fellow guys in the army, and they're just celebrating the fact that they've finally gotten their wives and kids back. And David doesn't even recognize the fact that a few dozen miles northward, his best friend has just gotten murdered. And father, yeah. So like the people he loves the most are getting murdered. And he probably has an idea, right? Because he was going to that battle. But I can almost guarantee you he's grateful that he wasn't there. Other than the fact that he probably would have, I can almost guarantee you once the Philistines raised a sword against Jonathan, David would have probably been like, oh no, this is unacceptable. And he would have turned on him. But it's just sad. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Right? Like, you can just visualize this in your head. Right? All the sons of Saul are falling. And then the archers see him, and Saul, he's panicking. And the thing is, Saul's huge, right? He's a head taller than everybody else. He's a tall guy. Everybody sees him. He's dressed as a king. He's wearing his armor, the armor that he offered to David decades earlier, right? He's wearing this armor. He's panicked. He's weeping because his sons are dead. He realizes that his kingdom is gone, and he's trying to run for his life. And all the archers see him, and all of them turn in unison. And y'all ever seen the movie 300?
Yes.
Yes,
exactly.
You just see, and then one arrow pierces Saul. Another one, and he's just getting hit by arrows, and he realizes this is it, right? He's moments away from death.
It's a lot like Boromir's death from Lord of the Rings.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
It's a lot like that too. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. So the battle pressed hard against Saul. The archers found him. He was badly wounded by the archers. So this man, who everybody esteemed him so highly because of how big and tall he was, but that just made him a bigger target, and it gave more room for the archers to hit. And so he's getting struck left and right. He's badly wounded. You see him staggering. If you go back to this picture right here, you can see all the trees up there. He's probably trying to hide within the trees, trying to get away, but he knows that he stands no chance. His sons are dead. You probably wonder if he even wants to live at this point. And at some point, as he's staggering away, he decides that he doesn't want to live. He decides, you know what? I don't want to live, and I don't want these guys to be the ones to take my life. Then Saul came to his armor bearer, and he said, "Draw your sword, and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." So why does he ask him to thrust him through?
So the Philistines don't get the satisfaction and honor of having killed the king.
Yeah, so they don't get the satisfaction of being the ones to do it. And also, what does he mean by the second part, mistreat me?
Torture?
Torture, right?
Parade him around.
Or do that. Does that sound familiar to the story of Saul?
When he spared the king of the Amalekites.
Yeah. Remember whenever he spared the king of the Amalekites? That's exactly what he did. Right? God said, destroy the Amalekites. And Saul said, instead, I'm going to parade them around. And he spared Agag, the king of the Amalekites. And God was not happy about that. But the reason why you would do that is because if you just kill the king in battle, I mean, that's pretty good. But you know what's more impressive? If you take the king back home in chains and make him a slave and bring him out for festivities. Remember what they did with Samson in the book of Judges? Right? They didn't just kill Samson. No. They took him back. They plucked his eyeballs out. They made him a slave so that during parties they could be, oh, look, it's Samson, the one who caused us so much trouble. Saul's thinking about this, and he says, I don't want them to do that to me. And Saul knows that mentality because he was going to do it to Agag. And Samuel's the one who said, no, we're killing him. Because in that way, killing him is almost mercy. Right? And Saul says, I don't want that. But do you notice what he's still doing here? Like, do you see what his motivation still is?
I think he's focused on himself.
Yeah. Even in his death, he's still focused on himself. It's still about me. He's not thinking about the sanctity of life or fighting and just, this isn't Captain America over here saying, you know what, I'm going to fight till I can't anymore. This is a guy who says, you know what, I'm losing and I'm not going to, honestly, it's a guy who's so proud that he's not willing to let them win. He says, they might win this battle, but they're not going to be the ones to take my life.
It's kind of like Abimelech in Judges 10.
That's what.
No, yeah, it's like whenever the lady drops the millstone, please kill me so that they can't say that a woman killed me. It's like, dude, you're so arrogant because it's like, you can't kill me, only I can kill myself. That's how arrogant this guy is. He's just no. He's still focused on himself to the point that he's willing to take his own life just so that they don't have the satisfaction of saying they did it. And ironically, it's they could still say they did it. As we're going to see once we get to 2 Samuel, there's going to be a guy who actually says that he did do it. But Saul doesn't care. Saul's just saying, no. If I'm going to end this, I'm going to end my way. It's still about power. It's still about his own desire to be in charge. I can't have the kingdom, and I can't have the power that I want, but the one thing I have power over right now is how I die. I'm going to do it. Kind of sad. But this is also a very common thing back then, right? It's not like Saul was unique here. What we need to recognize with Saul is that he was just the definition of a worldly king. He is exactly what the people asked for. The people didn't ask for an evil king. They didn't ask for a godly king. They said, we want a king like the nations. That's what they got. And so Saul, we look at him and we're like, dude, you are the most arrogant person ever. That is typically how worldly rulers are, right? We shouldn't be shocked whenever politicians are arrogant. That's just how things are. People abuse power. Saul said to the armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it. Let these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me. Interestingly, I believe there is a Jewish tradition that says that this armor bearer, I don't know if it's true or not, I kind of like it, but they said that the armor bearer was Doeg the Edomite at this point. Do you remember who that was?
Is that the guy that killed all the priests that had helped? Well, one of the priests helped David.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's that guy. Yeah, Doeg the Edomite was the one who betrayed the priests and went and told Saul, and then he came back, and he's actually the one. Whenever Saul told his men to kill the priests, Doeg the Edomite was the one who actually did it. And so I don't know whether or not Doeg was that guy, but the great irony is that the armor bearer is also going to die by Saul's sword. And so if this is Doeg, then the irony is that the very sword that he used to kill the priests becomes the same sword by which he himself is slain, which is just kind of cool. If that was the case, I imagine that the author would put that there, but it could also be distracting from the point. It seems like this is mainly focused on Saul. His armor bearer would not, for he feared greatly. He says, I can't do that. I will not touch my king. And quite fittingly, right? That's you would expect a good servant to respond that way. And he sees that his king is already fearful for his lack of authority. You probably don't want to contribute to that, right? You're like, I'm not going to do that to you. No, sir. Therefore, Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. Right? What a sad story, right? This is one of those moments where, once again, if it were a movie, I would do, a little moment where it just like pans in on Saul's face, and then in those moments, as he's like just bleeding out, there's just flashbacks of him as a young boy just walking around looking for donkeys, and then he comes up to Samuel, and Samuel appoints him as a king, and then it cuts to him like hiding in the baggage and getting out sheepishly, and then it cuts to him going, and he's running around getting an army together to go fight for on behalf of Jabesh Gilead, and you would have just all these moments. And then you would have it cut to him offering the sacrifice he wasn't supposed to. And then it would cut to him sparing the Amalekites. And you would have all these moments where it just like sees like his successes and his failures all one after another, all building up to this moment. And then you just see Saul die. It's like, oh, it's just like really sad moment here. It's just all built up to this. In many ways, 1 Samuel is kind of Saul's book. Even though David is the one who we typically focus on, in many ways, it really is kind of about Saul. Yeah.
You said it, like speaking of like a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I seem to find a lot of places where this can be used. It's just the Thanos like, fine, I'll do it myself.
Yes. Yeah, except I don't think Thanos was thinking this way. Fine, I'll do it myself. It's like, oh, yikes. I should have aimed for the head. Grabs Thor's axe and does it himself. Yeah, yeah, that's funny. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. So the question does become, did he fall on his own sword or on Saul's sword? I don't know. If it's Doeg, I really kind of, fingers crossed, wish that it was Saul's sword because of the poetic irony there. But yeah, what do y'all think about this? I've done a lot of talking here. What do y'all think about this story so far?
Sad. Horrible.
Sad, horrible.
I think it's even more sad when you mention this most days, but I mean, originally Saul didn't even want this.
Yeah.
Like, he got kind of pushed into it. I mean, it was still on him. Like, he was his fault, what he did, but it's just, that's what makes it sad, too.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the irony, because we look at that, and we think, oh, he didn't even ask for this. But in many ways, that doesn't matter, right? Because it doesn't matter whether or not you ask for something. It's a matter of what does God want you to do, right? That's the issue. We live our lives constantly wanting to do the things we want to do, but in many ways, it doesn't really matter what you want to do. If God gives you the freedom to choose, that's really cool, but if anything, sometimes that just gets you in trouble, because whenever you do the things that you want to do, usually you end up doing them for wrong reasons. But yeah, so Saul didn't want this, but that doesn't justify his disobedience. It does make it a little sadder, though, because you realize it set him on this trajectory, but the only reason it set him on that trajectory is because of the type of person he was even before he was called to do it. Because the people asked for a worldly king, and Saul happened to be the definition of a worldly man. And so, yeah, he didn't want to do it, but that's precisely because he was a worldly guy. It seems like in many ways David also does not want to be king. Right? David honestly seems like, but the thing is, David's not going to respond that way. That's why you have to be reading this story very closely to notice that David doesn't seem to have a strong desire to be on the throne. Right? David seems more content being a shepherd. David seems totally content just with his sheep, playing the harp, and he starts making a lot of stupid choices once he gets onto the throne, because it seems like he just doesn't feel as comfortable there, and that's why he ends up just kind of abusing it as well. But the difference is that you have both of these guys who God just sovereignly picks. One of them resists it from the very beginning. David never resisted. David just goes with it, and where God leads, David follows. And I think that kind of highlights, I didn't even really think about that until you said it, but that does highlight a difference between a man after God's own heart and a king like the nations, right? A lot of the times we spend our life trying to figure out, what do I want to do? When really it's, what does God want me to do? And it actually ties into the question we were asking earlier, like, how do you figure out what God's calling you to do? Sometimes he gives you the choice. Not every one of us is going to be a Saul or David where God just says, go do this. But if he does tell you to do that, it doesn't matter whether or not you want to do it or not. You should respond positively. Same thing with any command in the Bible, right? That's one thing, like, whenever people talk about hot button issues nowadays, like, that talks about, like, homosexuality and stuff like that, and they're like, well, this is what I feel. And I'm like, okay, but it's not about what you feel, right? And I try to bring up a hypothetical scenario. Let's say that I were to open up the Bible to a random page, and I came across this verse which said, David Tate shall never teach a Bible study ever again. Well, I love teaching Bible studies, right? That's my favorite thing to do. But if the Bible says it, I need to obey it, regardless of what I want to do. And I got to say, okay, guess I got to find something else to do, right? Or if it says David Tate may never wear the color blue again. Blue's my favorite color. It doesn't matter, right? What the Bible, it's about how you respond to God. It's not about what we want to do. It's about what does God say to do. And the difference between David and Saul is that Saul, from the very beginning, he resists it. And so that's why as soon as he embraces it, he still makes it about himself. Whereas David, he still goes through that same struggle, but he's at least serving God through it. And so every time David does make it about himself, he very quickly repents and gets back to pursuing God, right? And so that's actually interesting that you pointed that out. I hadn't thought about that, but you do have that contrast going on there. What else do y'all think about the story so far? All right, let's move on then. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon a sword and died with him. So now you have Saul lying on the ground, impaled by his own sword, and his armor bearer beside him. Thus, and this is just a sad verse. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor bearer, and all his men, on the same day together. Right? You can tell just how it's written. That it's not just being like, oh, they lost the battle. No, the author, we've already read that all their deaths happened. That verse is really unneeded. The only reason the author puts that verse there is because the Spirit of God inspired them to put that verse there to remind you of the casualties that have resulted from this person's failure. Right? We've already seen their deaths described. We don't need this information. It's literally just there to hammer the point in. It's like, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. In case you forgot, all of that happened on the same day just now. And it's just supposed to I don't think you're supposed to feel happy about this. And usually as Christians, we read the sad stuff and we're like, oh, I just want to fast forward to the happy stuff. But I don't think that's how the Bible wants us to treat things. I think the Bible wants you to linger in this. And I think it wants you to be sad. And I think it wants you to reflect. Because if you just jump to the happy stuff, you're never going to learn the lesson. You have to look at Saul, and you've got to empathize with him and recognize, yeah, that's us. We are Saul. We are the ones who do all this stuff. And I'm not saying you're going to end up dead, impaled on your own sword. I certainly hope not. But you might still end up feeling that same sort of dread if you keep pursuing your own path. Right? And so I think you have to allow yourself to emotionally read the Bible because literature should be emotional, right? It should evoke stuff within you, and you read it, and you're like, man, this isn't how it's supposed to be. And I think that's one reason we're going to go to Colossians, right? Because whenever you read Scripture, throughout it, you recognize this is a sinful, broken world, and it's not how things were meant to be, right? From Genesis, you recognize that. And that's because in the early chapters of Genesis, you see we were created to dwell with God in a place of harmony and peace without sin. And so every time you see something tragic happening, there's this ache within our soul saying something's not right. And so we're going to take a break from this book, go to Colossians, and we're going to see the solution to it. Right? Colossians is all about the supremacy of Christ and about he is preeminent above all things. And when we go to 2 Samuel, we're going to see how David's a pretty good king, but he's not Jesus. Right? And in fact, 2 Samuel is whenever we're going to see the need for Jesus explicitly stated, because God's going to be like, yeah, I'm going to give Jesus through you, right? That's going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 7. But we're going to take a break, go to Colossians, and actually see the solution to this hole that we see right here with Saul. Ironically, because he has a hole inside of him now. That's a little bit of dark humor for you. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor bearer, and all his men on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley, and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. Those all rhymed. That is amazing. I just like it. That's not important. They saw that they had fled. Oh, actually 2 of them are fled. So It's fled, dead, fled. When the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that the Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. So what do we have happening there? And what do you think the main thing you're supposed to notice here is?
The failure of the army.
The failure of the army. Death.
The failure of the people wanting a king in the land that God promised them. They lost the land that God promised them because they asked for a king, and the king did not do what he was supposed to do.
Round of applause for Rocky. That was just great. Look at that. No, absolutely. This is, that was really good. Yes. This is what the people asked for. They said, we want a king like the nations. And God says, you want a king like the nations? Say goodbye to your kingdom. Because you're not supposed to have a king like the nations. You're supposed to be set apart. You exist to be set apart. If you want to be like the nations, you won't have a kingdom to have. There won't be a kingdom to reign over. Because you exist to be set apart. That's why you're there. And so if you want to live in a kingdom, you need to have a king who is chasing after my own heart. That's what Samuel's trying to communicate here. And so Saul dies, and the Philistines are living in the cities of the Israelites. Right? At the beginning of the story, before they asked for a king, the Philistines had 5 cities. Right? They were on the coast. The Israelites were doing great without a king.
They were peaceful.
They were at peace, yes. Samuel was leading them. They were at total peace. And Samuel told them, if you want a king, he is going to take you to war, he's going to take your sons, and you're going to lose all your land. All their sons lie dead. Saul lies dead. Saul's sons lie dead, and now their cities lie vacant for a time until the Philistines come and live in them themselves. That's what they asked for. The lesson is, maybe we don't know what we want, and maybe we should just let God define our desires for us.
Amen.
Right? Maybe we should just let him do that. Right? Because we think we know what we want, and we say, God, I want to be like the nations. I want to be like the world. Man, they just seem like they've got it all together. And he's like, really? Do you see how broken and sinful they are? Now in this social media climate that we live in, it's even more possible, right? Because we see people living out in the world, but they only show us the good stuff, right? And so we look on Instagram and we're like, God, I just want to live that life. But you don't know what's going on behind the scenes there. Mm-hmm. And he's like, oh, you want that life? Okay, I'll give you that life. And you can go on these exotic trips and you can do all this stuff, but then guess what? You are more vacant and empty than anything ever. Yeah. Same thing. Oh, you want to be like the nations? Okay, well, guess what? People who, like nations, they come and go. They don't exist forever, right? The Philistines, where are they at today? The Assyrians, where are they at today? Babylonians, where are they at today? They're gone. But do you know who's still around today? Israel. Because guess what? They're not supposed to be like the nations, right? Kingdoms come and go, but if God is for us, who can be against us? Right? That's the lesson, right? If God is your king, and if your king is chasing after his heart, then your kingdom's going to be fine. But if you want to be like the nations, say goodbye to your kingdom. That's God's lesson. So, Rocky, you absolutely killed it. Very good. Yes. Round of applause a second time. They abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. This is the result of what they asked. And it's not like it shouldn't come as a surprise. It's exactly what Samuel told them, and they said, okay, that's fine. Sad. And now we read the last paragraph of 1 Samuel. It's about to get gruesome. I warn you, this is rated R. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days.
Why would they fast?
Because they're sad.
Mourning.
Yeah, they're mourning. These people really liked Saul.
But then
Because you remember who the people of Jabesh Gilead are?
The people of his hometown.
No, they're the ones that Saul saved at the very beginning of his story. Remember that?
Yeah, that was a guilt.
Is
They're
that
the ones
we
who
got
were
the
in
army
need.
together?
Yep, he got the army together and went and saved them. And they remembered that. It's a sad thing that the only people who helped him were the ones from the very beginning of his story. Right? Because it means that he didn't seem to have many allies by the end. The people of Jabesh Gilead, those are also the ones, back in the book of Judges, they were the one group that didn't go fight against the tribe of Benjamin. Remember? Which kind of explains why Saul would go help them out in their time of need. So they show hesed to Saul. Right? That's what they're doing. They're showing him something he doesn't deserve, but which they want to give because they do love him. And they're showing loving kindness to him. All right. The next day, right? So fast forward. The battle is over. Saul has been laying there for the evening. The Philistines went home. They had dinner. They partied it up. They come back the next day to strip the slain. Why would they do this?
More spoils.
Yeah, the spoils of war. Plunder. Time to get the booty. Right? They go there and, they strip the armor. That's useful armor to have. Or they can melt it down and make more idols. Right? They can strip all the weapons. Now they have more weapons. Right? That's what people do in battle. And as they're going through there, they find Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They go and they say, oh, there's Jonathan, there's Abinadab, there's Malchishua, there's Saul. Why would those people be significant to them?
The king and his sons.
Yeah, they represent the future of the kingdom of Israel. To them, this is a sign that the Israelites are nothing to worry about anymore. Right? To them, it looks like they've won. Right? The kingdom of Israel is gone. They stand no chance. And in many ways, that's what it looks like. Because now, Israel doesn't have a king. Right? David's going to be king, but he's not king yet. As of right now, the kingdom of Israel literally has ceased to be. Right? The king is dead. His heirs are dead. Nothing left.
Even if he's anointed and just unknown, he's not king right now.
In God's eyes, he's king. But in the people's eyes, he hasn't been declared king yet.
Okay.
Right? I mean, the people view him in a kingly way, and they treat him kind of like a king, but he hasn't been declared king yet. And the Philistines, as far as they know, he's still on their side. He hasn't totally left them yet. So they find the bodies on Mount Gilboa, and then this is the sad part. Right? And it's already sad, but it just gets worse. So they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people.
So they're happy about it.
Yeah. They do to Saul what David did to Goliath. Right? Yeah. And I'm not saying that's why they did it. I think that was just a common thing to do back then.
decapitate
On the
his
armor
head as
part of
a
the
trophy.
You get cut off his head.
Yeah. Why would they do this? Why would you cut off the head? Why would you strip off the armor?
Same thing that Saul did with the king. Go around with it.
Yeah. You show it off.
Like they wanted to, the reason Saul killed himself was because they couldn't do it to him alive, but since they can't do it to him alive, they're going to do what they can.
Oh, yeah.
Like a trophy.
Yeah, it's a
Kinda
trophy.
Kind of like the deer head on the wall.
Oh,
It's kinda
absolutely.
like
No,
the-
it's exactly like that. And they're literally going to put it on a wall. Yeah.
It's kind of like Goliath's sword that David got.
Yeah.
When the priest gave it to him.
Yeah.
It was just sitting in the temple.
If you're running around with the armor of Saul, the question is, how'd you get that? We defeated Saul, right? You cut off the head of Saul. Well, you weren't able to kill him, but you were able to make sure he stayed dead, right? This is sad. And now, guess what? Saul's the same height as everybody else.
Oh, God.
There's the. I mean, I know that's dark humor, but there's also irony to that, right? Because the whole thing that set Saul apart was that he was a head taller than everybody else. But in his death, he's like everyone else, right? He's no different than any other man. He's a head shorter, and that makes him just like everybody else. It's dark, but there's also some twisted irony to it, right? Now he's the same height. You thought you were amazing, you thought you were a big guy. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Thus ends the story of Saul. I had to rhyme it. Okay. So they cut off his head, stripped off his armor, and I imagine that they probably did that with Saul's sons too. We don't know. We know that they take the bodies and stuff. I imagine the reason why they don't have it mentioned about the other sons is probably out of respect, right? Because Saul, they do want you to reflect on the sadness of this, but still, Saul is the bad guy here, and they're highlighting the danger of sin, right? So there's a reason to mention Saul, but we're going to see that all of the bodies are retrieved from the wall, but it's really focusing primarily on Saul here. I would think just out of respect to Jonathan, you just don't mention, oh yeah, and they cut off Jonathan's head too, because that's not the last image you want of Jonathan, right? You don't mind Jonathan dying in battle, but you don't want to linger on the image of Jonathan's head being cut off. Whereas Saul is like, okay, it's sad, but he brought it upon himself in many ways. And then they sent messengers throughout the land to carry the good news. I wouldn't be surprised. In Hebrew, I don't know what the word for good news is there, but in the Greek Septuagint, I would not be surprised if the word for good news there is euangelion, the same word where we get the word gospel from. Because a lot of times the word good news in Greek is gospel. Because that's what you would do. Whenever, usually the good news was whenever there was a new king in the region, right? You would send it out. That's whenever Jesus shows up proclaiming the gospel, he's proclaiming there's a new king in town. Well, the Philistines, they send out good news. Hey, King Saul is no longer amongst the prophets, other than the dead ones. Right? Yeah. King Saul is no longer king. He's dead. So, there's good news for them, not for Israel. And they send it to the house of their idols. Why would it mention sending it to the house of the idols?
Because it just emphasizes that the group of people that are very different from God's people.
Yeah, so it emphasizes how terrible these people are. They're not worshiping the God of Israel, but theologically speaking, when it comes to winning wars, you have to realize that these are cultures where, honestly, we should view it this way as well nowadays, but back then, wars were not simply fought between people, right? They lived in a world where everybody had a supernatural worldview, and whenever Israel fought against the Philistines, it was not simply Israel versus Philistines. It was also Yahweh versus the gods of the Philistines. And so, if they win, what does that say about their gods versus Yahweh?
They're more powerful.
They are more powerful.
Or so they think.
Well, that's what they think. And that's what I'm saying. Our actions have consequences. Because Saul was unwilling to worship Yahweh, his final testimony to the people of Philistia was that the God of Israel was not powerful. We have to recognize that the way we live will send a message.
Yeah.
How much we revere God. That's the thing. Yes, we are saved by grace through faith, but the way that we conduct our lives will testify to people how we view our God. Is he a God who is worth serving? Then you'll live for him. If he's a God only worth praying a prayer to whenever you're 5 years old and then not doing anything for him, that would suggest that your God's not very big. Right? But if you devote yourself to Christ and every single thing you do every single day is just living and breathing Jesus and talking about him and denying yourself pleasures in order to live for him, that's going to send a message. And people might not even agree with you. They might not even say, you know what? I think Christianity is true. But what they will say is, that Maverick guy, he believes that God is a big God. Right? They might not agree with him, but they'll say, he believes it. And if there's ever a time whenever they need to talk to somebody who they think is a genuine Christian, they'll go up to Maverick. And they'll say, you know what? I can't speak for all the Christians, but I can tell that you genuinely believe this. Because the way you live says it. Saul didn't live in a way that told people that Yahweh was a big God. Saul lived in a way that told them that he thought he was a big man, and they were sure to prove him otherwise by cutting off his head. Formerly, God cut off the head of the Philistine god. Remember that? Whenever the Ark of the Covenant was in Philistine territory and the statue fell over and the head fell off and everything? Well, how the turntables have. Right? Everything's flipped now. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. Just like they put the Ark of the Covenant in the temple of Dagon, now they put Saul's armor, the armor that he offered to David, in their own temple. And they fastened his body to the well of Bethshan. At the end of this, I'm going to show y'all a picture of Beth Shan. It's still there to this day. It's actually up on top of a hill. Right? It's actually a pretty big hill, too. And there's ruins of the ancient Old Testament city still there to this day if you go there. I think we're actually going there on this trip. I believe. But Beth Shan, it's there. I've never been there before, but I think we're going there this time. It's a big old hill, and there'd be a wall at the very top. And so wherever you were coming from, you would go there and you would see the bodies of the king of Israel and his sons hanging there. It sends a message, right? This is what Yahweh can do for you to other people. Right? This is what remains of the kingdom of Israel. Sad. It's also just embarrassing, right? They stripped him of his armor, so Saul is naked, right? He's like, they're trying to humiliate him, right? There's this posthumous humiliation. This is what Saul was afraid of, except they would have been doing it to him while he was alive, and so he was just sparing himself the embarrassment of having to endure it. So really, his death was an act of cowardice. But here they are; they're hanging his bodies up there naked for people to go by and spit upon and mock, and it's sad. I'm just going to keep repeating the words "it's sad" because that's kind of the only way I can summarize it. But then the final verses. This is the one thing I do like about the Bible is that it doesn't usually end on a negative note, right? Like it's sad, but then there's always like this glimmer of hope to let you know that maybe there's going to be something good in the future. And so we get to verse 11. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So I've got this map over here. You can see this is the valley of Jezreel, right? This is also where Megiddo's at and everything. This is where they fought the battle. Shunem is right here. This is where the Philistines were encamped. Mount Gilboa is right over here, right? So they were fighting right there. They fought here. Saul dies here. Beth Shean is just a little over there. It's very close. Jabesh Gilead, way over here, right? Across the Jordan River, a pretty good distance away. But the news is going everywhere. And they hear that Saul has been killed. And so it seems like, 2 days have passed now? Right? Saul dies. The next day they get the body, they decapitate it, they hang it on the wall. And that day, the people of Jabesh hear about what's happening, and they don't waste any time. It says, all the valiant men arose and went all night. Right? They didn't take any breaks. They pushed through the night, and in the dead of night, when nobody was looking, I guess, they took the body of Saul. Right? Why did they do this?
Because they felt compassion or hesed for them. For him and his sons.
Mm-hmm.
That's
It's out of respect. It's honor.
Yeah.
Right? Because Saul, he did some bad stuff, but nobody deserves to be treated this way.
Were the valiant men among who were they from first?
The people of Jabesh Gilead?
Yeah.
They're Israelites.
But the valiant men, that people came and then took the bodies.
Yeah, so the valiant men, they're also Israelites from Jabesh Gilead.
Okay.
But these people, I think that the author of Samuel really likes them because they're responding to Saul how David would respond to Saul. These people are doing exactly what David would want to be done. But you know what? I can almost guarantee you that all of David's men would have probably left Saul hanging there. Because David's a special guy, and we're going to see, whenever we get to 2 Samuel, we're going to see David's reaction. And he's going to have a very severe reaction to Saul's death, and it's not going to be happy. He's going to weep, and he's going to cry, and he's going to mourn over Saul and Jonathan's death, and he's just going to be destroyed over it. And he's going to like the Jabesh Gileadites, and he's going to be really fond of them. So the story is sad, but it ends with a little hopeful note. Right? Because we do see, in many ways, it's kind of like the story of Judges again, right? We just see everything just ending really sadly and depressingly. But then there's a glimmer of hope. And you're saying, you know what? Maybe there are some people out there who will still show hesed. And there are some people out there who will be grateful. And sure, Saul was a failure, but he had some good moments. And he did save those people. And yeah, how he got his army together wasn't necessarily the kindest way of doing things, and in many ways he got them together like a worldly king would, but he did it to save his people, and that was the best moment that we saw from Saul. And so I think it's good that the author mentions that, because the author could just end it with Saul hanging on the wall. But instead, the author chooses to end the book by mentioning these guys who came in and they remembered what Saul had done for them, and they take his body down, they take his son's bodies down, they take them back home, they burn them, and they give them a proper burial, and then they don't, notice what they do, they don't take Saul's remains back to Gibeah. They don't take it, for all we know, Gibeah could be Philistine territory right now, we have no idea. But they don't make any efforts to bring Saul back to his hometown. Instead, they want Saul with them. Right? They plant his remains under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and they fast. And that's how 1 Samuel ends. It ends with some people who, they see what's happening, and rather than rejoicing over the fact that God has just supernaturally provided a way for Saul to get out of the way and David become king, rather than rejoicing in those things, they recognize that the king of Israel, God's anointed, God's first anointed, has died. And they need to be shown respect. And so they retrieve his body in the dead of night, go on a little secret ops mission. They take the body down, they go give it a proper burial, and they weep. I think it's a pretty good ending. Right? It's still sad, but it's not as sad as the previous verses. Because at least there's some hope in humanity, and you see that maybe there's a chance that you can rebuild from this. Right? Because there's some people who are willing to at least show common courtesy and respect to people in power. And so that paves the way for 2 Samuel. I do want to do just a few brief moments just reflecting on the book as a whole and just kind of talk about main themes that we've seen along the way. But real quick, I do want to show you some more pictures. This right here is just a picture that kind of just shows you the overall thing right here. This is the mountain that you saw at the very beginning. This is Mount Gilboa, like the rolling hills and stuff, just from a different angle. You can see this is the battle where the battle was at. This is the big flat area before. That's Shunem over in the distance where the Philistines were encamped at. So you have the Israelites over here, Philistines over there. They fought in the middle. Endor is over here. That's where Saul went and visited the witch. And so if the Philistines are all over here, Saul had to go in the middle of the night, and he had to go through Philistine territory just to go inquire of this witch, which shows how desperate he was. He was willing to go through enemy territory just to inquire. And so they go to the battle. They go over here. This is where Saul and his sons die. In Beth-Shan, it's also known as Beth-Shean, either one. It's further this way, just outside of the map. But they're also, once again, they're really close together. These are not like super far apart. Jabesh Gilead's a little further, but I just wanted to give you this stuff just so you can visualize the scene. I think it's kind of useful to look at. And then, I'm going to wait for Maverick to take a picture real quick. And then I'm going to show you one more picture, and this is we're having more people take pictures. I could also just send you these files, like the actual original pictures. Yes. I could just do that for you. And then the last thing we have here is Beth-Shan. This is not the city right here. This is actually, I believe it's a Roman city from later on. But Beth-Shan is up here. This is the hill, and you can see some of the remains of the ancient city right there. The wall would have been like right there. So you can see how public of a display this would have been. There would have been a big wall, and if you were just coming from anywhere, you would just see the bodies hanging. Very public display. In many ways, it kind of reflects what the Romans did to Jesus, right? Strip you naked and publicly display your dying body, even though they'd already be dead. But that's just how people did stuff. It teaches a lesson, right? If you see the king of Israel's dead corpse hanging there, you know not to mess with the Philistines. But David's not going to learn that lesson. He's going to be like, nah, I got this. Well, God's got this. And so there's that. Now, real quick, just to close this out, like I said, we've finished 1 Samuel today, which is kind of sad. We'll be in 2 Samuel in a few weeks, but we're going to go to Colossians first. But I just want to spend just a few minutes, not long at all, reflecting on the book as a whole. What are your thoughts about it? What are your big takeaways? What are some things that you maybe want to address on the big scope of things that we just haven't really talked about, or that you just feel like you need to mention? Also, can you grab me a water, Sean?
Yeah.
Thank you. What do y'all think?
I do have a summary. I'm glad you mentioned the part about the prior reading of Judges, because I was looking at Samuel as the overview, and that's actually really important that the part about the king, that they shouldn't have one, but God said, go ahead, you can have a king and see how that is. They want to be like the other nations around them. And then I could keep Hannah, when I have a child, with the child, her child was Samuel.
Yep.
Right, and he's the prophet, and that sort of carries over. In the book is mainly Saul and David, and Saul is the worldly, the tall, like and handsome, but he rises and then he falls like terrible.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's the story of how the book is mostly written. It's just there's this rise and fall of a king.
Yeah, and sadly, I wish I could tell you that 2 Samuel was going to be any different, but it really isn't. It's not going to be nearly as sad, but there's going to be even more drama. Because David's kingship, like 2 Samuel is all about David's kingship. He becomes king early on, and he's king even, like David doesn't die in 2 Samuel. David dies actually in 1 Kings.
Right.
But David's story, it's going to be even more drama filled than Saul's, as far as we know. I mean, we have more stories about David than we do about Saul, to be fair. But David, the cool thing about him that we're going to see is that he responds more appropriately to the hardship, and a lot of the stuff he goes through, he takes responsibility for. And so you look at it, and it's sad, but he owns up to it, and he says, yeah, I brought this upon myself, and that's just part of life.
And I'll also say what I say is, rather than rise and fall, the contrast is David, like one of the important ones other than the king, there's no other, was when you say he's a man after God's own heart, how the contrast is, that has the Goliath story, right? Where he was a shepherd boy. He made music and he was a kid, and he had multiple roles. Yeah,
David. I mean, he's probably like the original Renaissance man, and then his son Solomon becomes a Renaissance man too. He's just like a man, like he's a jack of all trades. Speaking of, you brought up the man after God's own heart thing. That's a really big theme of 1 and 2 Samuel.
Yeah.
What are just some overall traits that y'all picked up on about that? Or were you gonna say something?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go for
You
it.
can finish.
No, go with what you were gonna say. We'll come back to mine.
I was saying, like you said, say that again.
Man after God's own heart.
Man after God's own heart was David.
Right.
And we see David fall in sin and repent.
Right.
And that's the perfect example of how we should do it.
Yeah. And we've seen it happen multiple times.
Multiple times.
Right.
And you can see that even though David is a man after God's own heart, he still fails.
Yeah.
And sometimes in our lives we fail, but we can always get back up.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thing about Samuel, once again, is that the bad guys have elements of good to them, and the good guys have elements of bad. Because it's showing the complexity of all this stuff. And Samuel is probably, when it comes to scripture, it's probably one of the most complex books when it comes to nuance and like moral ambiguity. There are times when people look like they're doing the right thing and they're doing the wrong thing, and there's times where people look like they're doing the wrong thing and they're doing the right thing. So Samuel's all about moral ambiguity, but it's all about devotion to God. And I'm really glad that it doesn't shy away from David's failures. Because from the beginning that David is not going to be the solution to the problem. Well, not from the beginning, right? For the early chapters, David's like, oh my, this guy's perfect. But then you see some cracks. You're like, okay, so he's not the solution to the world's problems, but he is a shining example of what we should be.
Another earlier part before Saul, I think it was before Saul, where was the attitude towards the Ark of the Covenant, and how the Israelites weren't respectful of the covenant. They thought it was like a magic trick, that they could use God's power, but their opponents actually did have respect. First off, they thought, okay, we'll take it, and then Dagon happened.
Yeah, they kind of respected the Ark more than Israelites.
Yeah, more than the Israelites. Yeah, they saw they had God's power more than the Israelites, and then they put it away. Dagon, their God, the false idol, and then Yahweh, through that, destroys, sort of demonstrates his power over the false gods.
Yeah.
But the part about the covenant, I think, was one of the key points that they could see that, like, no, this is God's power, and the Israelites didn't see that at first. They sort of, the way they addressed God's, like, Ark of the Covenant was, something was off.
Rocky, was there another thing you were going to say? Okay.
I'll probably get it.
Okay. Anybody else? What are some other big takeaways that y'all have had from Samuel?
I'd say that sin has consequences that follow it, and that it doesn't necessarily just affect you. So if you sin, doesn't mean the consequence is just going to be on you, but it's going to affect the people around you. Because we see how there's some, like, Saul starts to do sinful things at the beginning of his reign, and it ends with him, his sons, and all his people dying, and the Israelites dying.
Yeah.
Because he didn't do what he was supposed to do. And the thing that sets apart Saul from David is that Saul doesn't know how to respond to sin. sometimes there might be times where he seems like he recognizes that he might sin, but he doesn't know how to respond to it in repentance, while David is willing to be wrong. He's willing to humble himself, and he's willing to repent of his sin.
Yeah.
So it's how he responds to sin, and how, I guess, the God that you serve, how it changes the way that you respond to your sin also.
Yeah, and it's really the difference between regret, remorse, and repentance, right? Just those three words, I guess. But also, to go back to this, whenever God's revealing himself to Moses, he says, I am a God who visits iniquity to the 3rd and 4th generation, but I show hesed to the thousands of generations. Honestly, I think that, the more I study Samuel, the more I think that a big emphasis is on the generational sins.
Really?
Just because we've seen this, we see this, every story is always, it's a story about a failed father, right? We start off with Eli as a failure as a father, right? Like every single leader that we encounter in Samuel is a failure when it comes to fatherhood. Eli is a failure as a father. Samuel is a failure as a father. Saul is a failure as a father. And just so you know, David's also going to be a failure as a father. He's going to be the best of them, but he's still not a great father. And one of his sons is literally going to rebel against him. And they're going to do other ones aren't too great either. And so every single one is about failures of fathers and the impact that their sins have on their children. And that probably is something we see that, where God is visiting the iniquity upon the children, which isn't to say that the children are guilty of it, but it shows the ramifications of sin, right? If you go and you squander all your money, that sin is going to affect your kids because now they're going to grow up in poverty, right? And so there is this idea where I think maybe an aspect to being a godly person, an understated one that's not really, it's just laying behind all of the text. One thing, an aspect to being a godly person is being faithful to pass on the faith to the next generation and being mindful of how your actions affect the future generations. Yeah. Rather than just focusing on in the moment, you need to live in the moment and you need to be faithful in the moment, but your faithfulness in the moment has to be focused on how it's going to affect people in the future.
I'm going to agree with the father failure thing because we saw that.
Yeah. It's been going on since before that too.
Well, it happens in Joshua and Judges.
Every time it's always after this person dies, the generation falls back.
Yeah, which makes sense why Jesus says, go and make disciples. Because it's not enough to just believe. It's about discipling people and passing it on to future generations. That's why when you get to the books like 1st and 2nd Timothy, 2 Timothy specifically, he says, what I have taught to you, go and teach to other faithful men so that they can go on and teach it to others also. Right? He's saying this needs to be passed on. It's not enough to just believe yourself. We have a moral responsibility and a responsibility before God to be his ambassadors to pass on the message so that stuff like Judges don't happen. And that's why our churches are kind of failing right now, is because a lot of times we're so focused on evangelism that we're not discipling people. And that's problematic. We live in a world where we have easier access to Scripture than anybody has ever had. Right? For the majority of human history, nobody has had a personal copy of the Bible. Almost every one of us has a physical copy of our Bibles in our hands. I can put it on the screen, and you have this handy device right here that you can pull up a piece of Scripture in the blink of an eye, in whatever language you want, whatever translation you want, and whatever format you want. We have access to this, but we also live in the most biblically illiterate culture ever. There is no excuse for that. If people back in the 1st century know Scripture better than we do, that is highly problematic, but it's because we're not discipling people. And so I don't think we should be surprised when our churches are failing, because we're doing the same things that they failed to do in Joshua, Judges, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. We're not discipling, right? We are trying to believe, but it's not enough to do that. We need to be grounded in the faith. We need to be equipped with it. We need to know Scripture. We need to know how to obey. It's a big aspect. It's a really huge thing.
So would you agree that for David, the demonstration of the nobility of David's character is really, in comparison to Saul, it's their response. So with the Psalms and David was surrounded by enemies. He's saying, "Praise God, thank you, God. We're surrounded by enemies. I thank you so much." And he has attitude. He has towards God is always one of joy and praise, and he really trusts God.
Yeah.
And by comparison, I saw that Saul gets angry and paranoid and jealous, and he has hateful responses to things.
Yeah. You know, I never thought of it that way, but I think you're right. I think that if you're talking about just, if you were to boil down a man after God's own heart to one single thing, it might be about how you respond to God, right? Like, because it is responsive. Because really, David and Saul are not that different from one another.
Yeah.
Especially when we get to 2 Samuel, we're going to see they're not that different. But how they respond to God could not be more different. That is the thing that sets them apart. Saul, whenever he's called out on sin, he feels remorse, he feels regret, but he doesn't repent.
It happens, but you feel
And he just says, "Oh, I'm sorry, but honor me."
Yeah.
David, on the other hand, he says, "I've sinned against God."
Yeah.
And he repents, right? Saul, he's called by God to go be a king, and he resists. David is called by God to be a king, and he says, "Okay, not too eager about it, but okay, I'll do it." And we have to recognize that that really is going to be the thing that sets us apart from everybody else. How do we respond to God versus how do others? Because we have to realize we are not the ones that initiate the relationship between us and God. I'm not going full Calvinist here or anything, but I'm saying that God is the one who created us. We are the ones who sinned. He is the one who is initiating the salvation process, right? He is the one who reaches out to us by grace. He is the one who calls us back to him. He has done his part. Our choice is simply to respond.
Right.
If you compare everyone in this room to everybody who is currently out partying and living in the world or doing whatever,
It's not that different.
we're not different.
Yeah.
We are all the exact same. The only difference is how we respond to God. David is inquiring of God. He's saying, "God, what do you want me to do?" Saul,
Didn't know.
he inquires of God as a last resort after he's realized that what he wants to do is not working.
And the Hebrew name is to ask.
Yeah, and his name
So
literally
ironic.
means to
I
ask.
wish I
Yeah.
knew better.
David over here, what does his name mean? Beloved.
Yeah.
Right? Quite fitting.
Full of love.
And so, yeah, I think it's actually that was a really good point, George. Yeah. How do we respond to God? That really does set the difference. And that's why my favorite verse, it's written over there on that thing back there, Psalm 27:4. Right? "One thing have I asked of the Lord, and that will I seek after, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, and to meditate in his temple." Right? David's one desire was to be as close to God as possible. And that's how he chose to respond to God. If he was sinning, and he was called out on it, he responded by doing the thing that would allow him to get close to God again. Right? If he's being faithful to God, he's going to get close to God. Right? So it's about being near to God. Okay, Rocky, like 5 minutes ago, you started nodding your head and you like made it sound like you had picked up on what you were going to say again. Did you lose it again? Ugh. I'm sorry. We just like went on this whole other thing. All right. Think about it. What other things y'all got to say about Samuel?
I was just going to add to what y'all were already talking
Okay.
about, but I think it's like Psalm 32 or 33 where David is like the Psalm's main thing is like, "Blessed are those who like confess their sins to God."
Oh, really?
And it's like he talks about like, you know, while I was like in sin, it's like his bones wasted away and stuff, and he was like all anxious and stuff.
Yeah.
But then he like confessed and stuff. It's almost like the difference between Saul and David's almost like that part where he describes how he's feeling before. That's how it ends for Saul.
Yeah.
It's like he never goes past that.
Yeah. Saul's like, while I was sin, I was chilling, and then it started being bad, and then I just killed myself. It's like, oh, that's terrible.
You said Psalm 32.
You can't just end it. You're always constantly feeling like you're wasting away.
Yeah.
You know,
Which, unfortunately, whenever you talk to people, it's not. I wish I could say that it was just non-Christians, but a lot of Christians feel that same way too. Just because, once again, lack of discipleship. Right? We say that we're Christians, but if you compare us, I'm not even just calling out other people. I'm saying if you compare me to a person who is not a Christian, how many differences are there between us? Right? I'd like to think there's a lot, but in reality, I don't think we deny ourselves nearly as much as Christ calls us to. And I think that we are probably a lot more worldly, and we take Christ's commands a lot less seriously than we ought to. And I think it's all a result of lack of discipleship. And that's why, even in our discipleship group that meets on Sunday nights, you'll notice that my primary focus is on Scripture. Not because that's all discipleship is, but it's because we are so fundamentally lacking in our knowledge of Scripture that you can't even begin to disciple people until they understand the Scriptures. And so right now we're just laying the groundwork and we're trying to get this understanding of it so that then we can begin to go out and live for him. But you don't know how to live for him until you've studied the Scriptures, right? Maverick, were you going to say something as well?
Yes. When I do feel bad about something, I pray every night that if I did sin, then I'll be like, I sinned. Or if I don't know if I sinned. So anytime I feel bad about something, and if I felt like I sinned, I pray to God after every single time I feel bad about that, if I sinned or not.
I think that's a healthy practice to have in general, just to be more mindful of. Because we don't want to make sin just about doing good or bad things. We want to recognize why sin is bad. And the main reason is because God doesn't approve of it, right? It's because we are deviating from what God desires. And so whenever we're combating sin, I think it's a healthy mindset to be thinking, God, this isn't just me being a bad person. It is me doing something that you don't approve of. Help me stop doing that. Help shape my desires. Because that's one thing. We need to recognize, once again, it's about how we respond to God. We are not doing this alone, right? Whenever I'm talking about being discipled and stuff like that, I'm not simply saying be a better moral person on your own. I'm saying we need to rely upon the Spirit of God to shape us and change us and make us different and make us new. That's what we need to do. That's what David did. Okay, last thoughts. Anything else you want to say? I know that people need to get out of here.
Just the first Samuel was like the richest story of all stories.
I told y'all going in. I think that 1st and 2nd Samuel are like the height of literature, not just biblical literature, all literature. I think it's just,
Crazy.
It's fantastic. I hope I convinced y'all of that, and I hope I'm going to continue convincing it of you to you in 2nd Samuel. Anything else? All right. I'm going to pray for us real quick, and then we can get out of here. Dear God, thank you so much for allowing us to go through this book. Thank you for providing us with this book, God. In your providence, you gave us something which we had no right to expect, but which you still abundantly gave. And I, for one, I'm going to try to speak on behalf of the whole group. I don't know if they all agree, but on my part, God, I will say that I am so grateful for this book that you have given us to allow us to learn more about you, to learn more about your heart, to learn more about what it looks like to chase after your heart, and to learn more about what it looks like to fail. I pray that as we leave here, we will know not only this story well, and that we'll understand what it was trying to communicate to its original audience, but that we'll understand how it applies to us and how it affects our lives and what we're supposed to take away from this, and to recognize that we're not David, we're Saul. And that we're the ones who are constantly failing, and we're the ones who are so morally impoverished that we just need to constantly lay our poverty at the foot of your cross and cry out in repentance and ask for your help to live for you, God. So I pray that we will not leave here unchanged, but that we will leave here changed, that we will learn to live for you more. And I pray that as we depart from this place, we will leave in safety, and that you'll keep us safe as we return to our homes. And that when we gather here next week, we will all be able to gather, both those who are here right now and those who are not here and those who are watching online. I pray that all of us will be able to gather together as we go into the book of Colossians and see how you are the solution to all of our problems, God. Help us recognize that this story does not end in despair. It does not end in heartache. It does not end in hopelessness, but it ends with you sitting on a throne. And help us learn to worship and serve that God who is sitting on the throne, God. We love you. We praise you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.